Rain lashed against the windshield of the armored Bentley, blurring the neon lights of Chicago into streaks of blood red and cold blue. Inside, Salvatore Moretti adjusted his silk tie, his mind locked on the $1 million negotiation that had just collapsed. But then, the headlights swept across a desolate bus stop, illuminating a figure curled beneath a thin, soaking newspaper. A face he recognized, a face that belonged in the warmth of his penthouse, not shivering in the gutter. Stopping the car wasn't an act of mercy, it was curiosity. But what he found in her trembling hands, and the secret she was guarding with her life, would shatter his empire and bring a war to his doorstep that he never saw coming. The storm over Chicago wasn't just weather, it was a warning. The wind howled through the canyons of steel and glass, rattling the windows of the city's most exclusive establishments. But inside the back of the blacked-out Bentley, the silence was absolute. Salvatore Moretti stared out the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark glass. At 34, he was the capo of the Moretti crime family, a man who moved millions of dollars in logistics and security with a single phone call. He was feared for his temper and respected for his code of silence. Tonight, however, he was just tired. "Enzo," Salvatore said, his voice a low rumble. "Take the side streets. The police presence on Michigan Avenue is too heavy tonight." "Yes, boss," Enzo replied, the leather gloves creaking as he turned the heavy steering wheel. The car turned down a narrower, grimier street. This was the edge of their territory, where the pristine skyscrapers gave way to boarded-up storefronts and flickering street lamps. Salvatore watched the misery pass by with a detached gaze. He had grown up in streets like these. He knew the smell of desperation. But then, something broke his detachment. As the car slowed to navigate a deep puddle, Salvatore's eyes locked onto a bus stop bench. It was empty, save for a pile of wet trash. Or so he thought. As the headlights washed over the bench, the pile moved. A woman. She was curled into a tight ball, trying to shield herself from the freezing rain with nothing but a sodden newspaper and a thin, grey cardigan. It was a common sight in the city, but it was her hair that stopped his heart for a fraction of a second. Even wet and matted, it was a striking, unusual shade of auburn. He knew that hair. He had seen it swaying while a woman dusted the bookshelves in his private study. He had smelled the faint scent of vanilla and old paper whenever she left a room. "Stop the car," Salvatore commanded. Enzo hesitated. "Boss, this isn't a good spot to—" "I said stop the car, now." The Bentley lurched to a halt. Before Enzo could scramble out to open the door, Salvatore was already stepping into the deluge. His Italian leather shoes splashed into a puddle of oil and water. The freezing rain soaked his suit jacket instantly, but he didn't feel it. He marched towards the bench. The woman didn't move as he approached. She was shaking so violently that her teeth chattered audibly over the sound of the rain. "Isabel?" Salvatore asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the storm. The figure jolted. She looked up, terror widening her eyes. Her face was pale, gaunt, and smeared with grime, but it was undeniably her. Isabel Bennett. The quiet, efficient maid who had been working at the Moretti estate for 6 months. She was known for being invisible, for keeping her head down. When she saw him, she didn't look relieved. She looked horrified. She scrambled backward, slipping on the wet metal of the bench, trying to put distance between them. "Mr. Moretti," she gasped, her voice a ragged whisper. "Please, I didn't steal anything. Please don't hurt me." Salvatore frowned, the water dripping from his dark hair onto his forehead. "Steal? What are you talking about? Why are you sleeping on a bench, Isabel?" She hugged a tattered backpack to her chest as if it contained gold bars. They said if I came back, you'd kill me. I've stayed away. I promise. Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Who said that?" "Please, just leave me," she begged, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I'll leave the city. I'm trying to get a bus ticket. I just need a little more time." Salvatore looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just homeless. She was terrified of him. And she looked sick. Her skin had a translucent, waxen quality, and there was a dark bruise blossoming along her jawline that she tried to hide by turning her face away. A rage, cold and sudden, ignited in his chest. Someone had touched what belonged to him. Even the help fell under the Moretti protection. "Get in the car," he ordered. "No," she whimpered. "Isabel." He stepped closer, towering over her. He softened his voice, a rare occurrence. "I'm not going to hurt you. But if you stay out here tonight, the pneumonia will kill you before morning. Get in the car." She hesitated, her gaze darting to the black vehicle where Enzo was waiting with his hand on his holster. She looked back at Salvatore, searching for the monster she had been warned about. Instead, she saw a hand extended toward her. With a trembling breath, she took it. Her hand was like ice. Salvatore pulled her up, but her legs gave way immediately. He caught her effortlessly, scooping her into his arms. She was alarmingly light, nothing but bone and wet fabric. As he carried her towards the Bentley, she went limp against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Boss?" Enzo opened the back door, eyeing the dirty, soaking woman with confusion. "Call Dr. Aris," Salvatore barked, sliding into the back seat with Isabel still in his arms. He didn't care that the water and mud were ruining the cream leather interior. "Tell him to meet us at the penthouse, immediately." "Is she injured?" Enzo asked, jumping into the driver's seat and gunning the engine. Salvatore looked down at the woman unconscious in his lap. The backpack had slipped from her grip. A manila folder was poking out of the top zipper. But it was her wrist that caught his attention. As his thumb brushed against her pulse point, he saw the markings. Not just bruises, they were burn marks. Cigar burns. Salvatore's jaw tightened until it ached. "She's not just injured, Enzo. She's been tortured." The penthouse elevator opened directly into the foyer, a sprawling space of marble and modern art that overlooked the city skyline. Usually this place was a sanctuary of silence. Tonight, it was a triage unit. Salvatore carried Isabel into the guest suite, laying her gently onto the Egyptian cotton sheets. He stripped off his soaked jacket and threw it on the floor, barking orders at the staff who had scrambled out of bed. "Get warm towels. Get the medical kit. Where the hell is Aris?" "He's 3 minutes out, sir," Enzo said, standing by the door, his face pale. He had seen the boss angry before, but this was different. This was a quiet, simmering focus that usually preceded a funeral. Salvatore looked down at Isabel. In the warm light of the room, she looked even worse. The bruise on her jaw was purple and yellow, days old. Her lips were cracked. He reached for the backpack she had refused to let go of, placing it on the nightstand. "Matilda!" Salvatore shouted. The head housekeeper, a stout woman in her 60s who had practically raised Salvatore, hurried in with a basin of warm water. She stopped dead when she saw the woman on the bed. "Oh my God," Matilda whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. "Isabel." "You recognize her," Salvatore said, his voice dangerously calm. "Good, because you're going to explain to me why one of my employees was sleeping in a gutter and thinks I want to kill her." Matilda's hands shook as she set the basin down. She began to gently wipe the grime from Isabel's forehead. "Sir, we were told she was fired 3 weeks ago. Mr. Rocco handled it." "Rocco?" Salvatore's eyes flashed. Rocco was his underboss, his right hand. Rocco handled distribution and enforcement, not the domestic staff. "Why was Rocco firing a maid?" "He said—" Matilda hesitated, glancing at the unconscious girl. "He said he caught her stealing from your private safe. He said he found cash in her bag. He told us he escorted her out, and that if we ever spoke to her again, we'd be fired too." "Stealing," Salvatore repeated, testing the word. He looked at the frail woman on the bed. She was wearing shoes with holes in the soles. If she had stolen from his safe, she would have enough money to be halfway to Mexico, not starving on a bench 3 miles away. "Did you see the proof?" Salvatore asked. "No, sir. Mr. Rocco is—" "Well, nobody questions Mr. Rocco," Matilda said quietly. The elevator chimed. Dr. Aris rushed in, carrying his medical bag. He was a short, balding man who had stitched up more bullet wounds for the Moretti family than he cared to count. He didn't ask questions. He just went to work. Salvatore stepped back, pacing the room while Aris checked Isabel's vitals. He went to the nightstand and picked up the tattered backpack. He needed answers. If Rocco had lied to him, there was a reason. And in Salvatore's world, lies were usually expensive covers for betrayal. He unzipped the bag. Inside, there were no stolen bundles of cash. There was a change of clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, and the manila folder he had seen earlier. He opened the folder. It wasn't financial records. It wasn't codes. It was photographs. Grainy, zoomed-in photographs taken from what looked like a cell phone. The first photo showed a shipping container at the docks, Moretti territory. But the men standing in front of it weren't Moretti soldiers. They were wearing jackets with a distinct insignia, a red scorpion, the cartel from the south, the enemy they were currently in a ceasefire with. The second photo showed the men shaking hands. One was a cartel lieutenant. The other man, smiling broad and smoking a cigar, was Rocco. Salvatore felt the air leave the room. Rocco wasn't just firing a maid. He was selling the family out. Isabel must have seen something she wasn't supposed to. "Salvatore!" Dr. Aris's voice broke his concentration. Salvatore looked up, snapping the folder shut. "Will she live?" "She's malnourished and suffering from exposure. But with antibiotics and fluids, she'll recover," Aris said, removing his stethoscope. He looked grave. "But the burn marks on her wrists, they are infected. And there's something else." "What?" "She's pregnant, Salvatore, about 4 months along." The silence in the room was deafening. Salvatore looked at Isabel's flat stomach, hidden beneath the oversized sweater. 4 months. She had been working for him for 6. "Is the baby okay?" Salvatore asked, his voice low. Surprisingly, the heartbeat is strong. She shielded her abdomen. Even when she was likely being beaten, she protected the child. Dr. Aris packed his bag. "She needs rest, and she needs safety. If she wakes up in a panic, she could lose the baby." Salvatore nodded. "She's safe. Nobody touches her." Aris left, and Matilda finished cleaning Isabel up before retiring, leaving Salvatore alone in the dim light of the guest room. He pulled a chair up to the bed and sat down, the folder resting on his knee. He looked at Isabel's sleeping face. She was a witness. That's why Rocco had terrorized her. He must have threatened to kill her and the baby if she talked. He had thrown a pregnant woman onto the streets in winter to protect his treason. Salvatore reached out, brushing a stray lock of damp auburn hair from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were green, unfocused and glassy. She gasped, trying to sit up, but Salvatore placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy. You're safe." "The folder," she rasped, panic seizing her. "He'll kill me. He knows I have it." "Rocco?" Salvatore asked. She froze. "You know?" "I know he lied," Salvatore said. "I know you didn't steal, and I know he hurt you." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. He was meeting them at the docks. I was just bringing him his coffee in the back office. I heard them. He said he was going to take over. He said you were getting soft." She gripped Salvatore's hand, her nails digging into his skin. "He said he was going to arrange an accident for you next week." Salvatore's expression didn't change, but his eyes turned to ice. "Did he?" "I took the photos with my phone and printed them at the library," she whispered. "I wanted to show you, but he caught me before I could. He burned me." He said, her voice broke. "He said he'd cut the baby out of me if I ever came near you." Salvatore stood up. The transformation was instant. The concern for the woman vanished, replaced by the lethal aura of the boss. He buttoned his cuffs. "Rest, Isabel. You and your child are under my personal protection now." "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. Salvatore walked to the door, checking the load of the pistol tucked into his waistband. "I'm going to have a chat with Rocco," he said, "and I'm going to remind him that I am many things, but soft is not one of them." As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered it. "Mr. Moretti," a distorted voice said, "I believe you picked up a piece of my trash tonight. The girl. Send her out, and we won't burn your building down." Salvatore smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. Rocco was watching the house. "Come and get her," Salvatore said, and hung up. The silence that followed the phone call was heavier than the storm raging outside. Salvatore stared at the darkened screen of his smartphone, the distorted voice of the threat echoing in his mind. Send her out. It was a bluff, of course. Rocco wouldn't just leave if he handed Isabel over. Rocco was here to clean house. He was here to erase the only witness to his treason. "Enzo," Salvatore said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with lethal intent. "Code black. We are compromised." Enzo, who had been standing by the window, immediately shut the heavy velvet drapes. "The security feed is looping, boss. They hacked the system. I'm looking at the same footage of the empty lobby from 10 minutes ago." "They're already inside," Salvatore realized. He moved with a terrifying efficiency. He didn't run. He stalked. He crossed the room to a decorative bust of Julius Caesar on the mantel, tilting the head back to reveal a biometric scanner. He pressed his thumb against it. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a cache of high-grade weaponry. He grabbed a modified Sig Sauer and 2 spare magazines. He tossed a smaller Glock to Enzo. "Stay with the girl," Salvatore ordered. "Do not open this door unless it is my voice you hear. If they breach the room—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Enzo nodded, his face grim. He knew the protocol. Death before capture. Salvatore stepped out of the guest suite and into the long marble hallway of the penthouse. The lights flickered once, then died completely. The building's main power had been cut. Now the only illumination came from the lightning, flashing violently through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the expensive art collection. He moved silently, his socks sliding over the cold stone floor. He could hear them now. The faint crunch of boots on glass. They had breached through the terrace doors. Salvatore pressed his back against a pillar, controlling his breathing. He counted the footsteps. 3. No. 4. Heavy tactical gear. These weren't street thugs. These were hitmen. Rocco had brought in professionals. A flash of lightning illuminated the living room. 4 figures in black tactical gear and night vision goggles were fanning out, their suppressed rifles scanning the room. Salvatore didn't wait. He exhaled, stepping out from the cover of the pillar. Pop, pop! The first assailant dropped. 2 rounds in his chest before he even registered a target. The silence shattered. The remaining 3 spun around, their weapons spitting fire in the dark. Bullets chipped the marble pillar as Salvatore dove behind a heavy oak sofa. The room erupted into chaos. Vases exploded, paintings were shredded, and the deafening roar of gunfire drowned out the thunder. Salvatore moved. He never stayed in one spot. He rolled to the left, firing beneath the sofa, catching the second man in the leg. As the man screamed and fell, Salvatore rose and finished him. 2 left. "Suppressing fire!" one of the attackers shouted. They were communicating. Salvatore sprinted toward the kitchen island as bullets chewed up the floor at his heels. He slid across the polished granite, crashing into the other side, just as a grenade rolled into the living room. Flashbang! He squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears a split second before the deafening bang rocked the floor. Even with the precautions, his ears rang, and white spots danced in his vision. He was disoriented. He heard the rush of footsteps. They were charging him. Salvatore blindly fired over the counter, forcing them to pause. He needed an advantage. He grabbed a bottle of high-proof whiskey from the counter, stuffed a linen napkin into the neck, and used the gas ranger's pilot light, still flickering despite the power outage, to light it. He hurled the Molotov cocktail over the island. It smashed against the chest of the third attacker. The man shrieked as blue flames engulfed his tactical vest. The distraction was all Salvatore needed. He vaulted over the counter, putting a bullet in the burning man and turning his aim on the final intruder. The last man was huge, a brute of a mercenary. He tackled Salvatore before he could line up the shot. The gun skittered across the floor. They crashed into the glass coffee table, shattering it. Shards of glass sliced into Salvatore's back, but the adrenaline masked the pain. The mercenary had hands like anvils, wrapping around Salvatore's throat, squeezing the life out of him. Salvatore struggled, his vision darkening. He kneed the man in the ribs, but the armor absorbed the blow. He reached blindly for a weapon, his hand closing around a jagged shard of heavy glass. With a guttural roar, Salvatore jammed the glass into the gap between the man's helmet and his shoulder armor. The mercenary gargled, his grip loosening just enough. Salvatore twisted his hips, throwing the man off, and scrambled for his gun. He fired once. The mercenary went still. Salvatore lay on the floor for a moment, chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. The penthouse was a ruin. The smell of smoke, cordite, and blood was thick in the air. But it wasn't over. "Salvatore!" The scream came from the guest room. "Isabel." Salvatore scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agony in his ribs. He sprinted back down the hall. The door to the guest suite was splintered open. Inside, Enzo was on the floor, unconscious, blood pooling from a blow to the head. The balcony doors were open, the curtains whipping in the wind, and standing near the edge of the balcony, struggling against a man in a grey suit, was Isabel. The man was Rocco. Rocco had the barrel of a pistol pressed against Isabel's temple. He was smiling, his teeth white in the gloom. The wind howled, threatening to pull them both over the railing and down 40 stories to the street below. "Don't take another step, boss," Rocco shouted over the storm, "or the maid learns to fly." Salvatore froze, his gun raised. "Let her go, Rocco. It's me you want." "Oh, I'll get you," Rocco sneered. "But first, I want to see you break. You always acted like you were untouchable, like you were better than us. But look at you now, bleeding for a piece of street trash." Isabel was crying, her hands clutching her stomach protectively. Her eyes met Salvatore's. There was terror there, yes, but also a plea. Not for her life, but for the baby's. "Put the gun down, Salvatore," Rocco commanded. "Kick it over to me, or I paint the balcony with her brains." Salvatore hesitated. If he dropped the gun, they were both dead. If he shot, he might hit Isabel. The distance was 20 feet. In the dark. In the rain. "Do it!" Rocco screamed, jamming the gun harder into Isabel's head. She whimpered. Salvatore slowly lowered his weapon. He bent his knees, placing the Sig Sauer on the carpet. "Good," Rocco laughed. "Now say goodbye." Rocco shifted his weight, preparing to pull the trigger. In that split second, Isabel did the unthinkable. She didn't cower. She didn't scream. She stomped her heel down with all her remaining strength onto Rocco's instep. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was unexpected. Rocco flinched, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. That was all Salvatore needed. He didn't dive for his gun. He threw the knife he had pulled from his boot holster while bending down. The blade spun through the air, a silver blur in the lightning. It buried itself deep in Rocco's shoulder, the gun arm. Rocco screamed, dropping his weapon. Isabel threw herself to the ground, rolling away. Salvatore was on him in a heartbeat. He tackled Rocco onto the wet balcony. They grappled near the edge, the rain slicking the marble. Rocco was strong, desperate, and fueled by rage. He punched Salvatore in the wound on his head, sending a shock wave of pain through him. "You're finished, Moretti," Rocco spat, blood bubbling from his lips. "The commission approved this. You're a dead man walking." "Then I'll walk through hell," Salvatore snarled. He grabbed Rocco by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the railing. The metal groaned. Rocco looked back at the drop, his eyes widening in sudden realization. "Wait, Salvatore, wait. We can make a deal. I have the roots. I have the contacts. Salvatore looked at him, his eyes devoid of mercy. You touched what was mine. With a shove, Salvatore tipped him over. Rocco's scream was swallowed by the wind as he fell into the abyss of the Chicago night. Salvatore didn't watch him fall. He turned immediately to Isabel. She was curled against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. He fell to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms. She was freezing, soaked from the rain blowing in. "Isabel," he breathed, checking her for wounds. "Did he hurt you? The baby?" I think I'm okay," she sobbed, burying her face in his ruined shirt. "He hit Enzo. He came in from the balcony. I know. I've got you." Salvatore held her tight, his heart hammering against his ribs. For the first time in 10 years, he felt true fear. Not for himself, but for how close he had come to failing her. He looked back at the room. Enzo was groaning, starting to stir. The penthouse was destroyed. The police would be here in minutes. The cartel would be sending a second wave. They couldn't stay here. "Can you walk?" Salvatore asked, pulling back to look at her face. She nodded, wiping the rain from her eyes. She looked fragile, but there was a steeliness in her gaze he hadn't seen before. She had fought back. "Good," Salvatore said, helping her stand, "because we have to run, and we aren't stopping until we leave the city." The escape had been a blur of side streets, switched vehicles, and nerve-wracking close calls. Salvatore had an emergency protocol for situations like this, a burn bag with cash, passports, and keys to vehicles not registered to the family name. They had abandoned the Bentley 3 blocks away and taken a nondescript grey sedan, driving south until the city lights were just aglow in the rear-view mirror. Now, 3 hours later, the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, aching exhaustion. The safe house was an old hunting cabin in the dense woodlands near the Indiana border. It belonged to Salvatore's grandfather, a place that didn't exist on any digital deed or tax record. It was cold, smelling of pine needles and dust, but it was solid. Salvatore barred the heavy wooden door and turned to face the room. A single kerosene lamp cast a flickering orange glow. Isabel sat on the dusty sofa, wrapped in a wool blanket he had found in the trunk. She was staring at the fire he had just started in the stone hearth, her eyes vacant. Salvatore hissed in pain as he peeled off his shirt. The glass cuts on his back had stopped bleeding, but the bruising from the mercenary's grip on his throat was darkening to an ugly purple. He walked to the kitchen sink, pumping the hand lever until cold well water sputtered out. He wet a rag and began to clean the blood from his arms. "You're hurt," Isabel said softly. He turned. She had come out of her trance. She was watching him, her gaze lingering on the tapestry of scars and fresh wounds on his torso. "I've had worse," Salvatore said dismissively. "How is the stomach? Any pain? Cramping?" Isabel placed a hand on her belly. "No, just heavy. I think he's sleeping." "He?" Salvatore raised an eyebrow, walking over to the fire to warm his hands. "I have a feeling," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. A mother's intuition. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of the wood. It was an intimate silence, born of shared trauma, but there were questions hanging in the air, sharp and dangerous. Salvatore sat in the armchair opposite her. The distance between them was small, but the secrets were vast. "Rocco said the commission approved the hit," Salvatore said quietly. "That means this wasn't just a coup. It was an execution order. The other families have turned on me." He looked at her intensely. "And it's because of what's in that folder, isn't it? What exactly did you see, Isabel?" Isabel pulled the blanket tighter. "I told you, I saw him meeting with the Scorpions." "That's not enough to get the commission to kill a capo," Salvatore countered. "Rocco dealing with the Scorpions is treason, yes. But for the other families to sanction my death, they must believe I was the one making the deal. Rocco framed me." Isabel's eyes widened. He had a recording. He played it for the men at the docks. It sounded like your voice, giving orders to let the drug shipment through. Salvatore cursed under his breath. AI voice modulation, or a spliced tape. Rocco had been planning this for months. He had built a perfect frame job. "Why didn't you come to me the moment you found the photos?" Salvatore asked, his voice hardening slightly. "Why sleep on a bench? Why risk your life and your child's life?" Isabel looked down at her hands. "Because I didn't think you would believe a maid over your underboss. And because of who the father is." Salvatore went still. What does the father have to do with this? Isabel bit her lip, tears welling up again. Rocco knew. That's why he hated me. That's why he tortured me instead of just killing me quickly. He wanted to know if the father knew. "Who is he?" Salvatore asked. The question came out darker than he intended. A strange, possessive jealousy flared in his chest, irrational and hot. He needed to know who had touched her, who had left her pregnant and alone to scrub floors. "He's a dangerous man," Isabel whispered. "A man who doesn't know I exist anymore." "Is he one of my men?" Salvatore demanded. "No." "Is he a rival?" "Please, Salvatore," she begged, using his first name for the second time. "Don't ask me. If I tell you, it makes it real. It puts a target on his back and on mine." Salvatore stood up, pacing the small room. The shadows danced across his face. "Isabel, everyone has a target on their back right now. If this man has power, he could be an ally. If he's an enemy, I need to know." She shook her head vigorously. "He can't help. He doesn't remember." Salvatore stopped. "He doesn't remember?" Isabel looked up, her green eyes piercing through the gloom. It was one night, a gala, 6 months ago, the masquerade ball at the Venetian Hotel. Salvatore felt a chill run down his spine. He had been at that gala. It was the night the alliance with the Irish mob was signed. It was a night of heavy drinking, celebration, and fog. He remembered waking up the next morning with a splitting headache and a vague memory of a woman in a gold mask, a woman who smelled of vanilla. He looked at Isabel, really looked at her. The auburn hair, the eyes, the scent he had recognized in the car. Vanilla and old paper. The room seemed to spin. "You were there?" Salvatore asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I was a server," Isabel confessed, her voice trembling. "I wasn't supposed to be in the VIP suite. You were alone. You looked so sad. You asked me to stay. You didn't treat me like a server. You treated me like I was a queen." Punhan. Salvatore's heart hammered against his ribs. The memory was fragmented, but the feeling was there. The softness of skin. The way the woman had laughed. He had searched for the woman in the gold mask for weeks, but she had vanished. "I didn't know who you were," Isabel cried softly. "Not until I got the job at the estate. When I realized the man I had slept with was the Mafia boss. I was terrified. I thought if you knew I was pregnant, you'd think I was trying to trap you. Or you'd take the baby away." Salvatore fell back into the chair, stunned. The air left his lungs. The baby, the child she had shielded with her body while Rocco kicked her, the child she had slept in the rain to protect. It was his son, or his daughter. "Isabel," he said, his voice cracking. She flinched, expecting anger. "I'm sorry. I was going to leave. I promise. I never wanted anything from you." Salvatore reached out, taking her cold hands in his. His large, scarred hands engulfed hers. He didn't pull away. He held on as if she were the only anchor in a storm. "You think I'm angry?" he asked, searching her face. "Aren't you?" "I have spent my life building an empire of dust," Salvatore said, his voice thick with emotion. "Money, power, fear. It all means nothing. Tonight, watching Rocco hold a gun to you. That was the only time I realized I had something to lose." He moved his hand from hers to her stomach. He rested it there gently, feeling the warmth through the wool blanket. "My air," he whispered, a sense of wonder replacing the rage. "You are carrying my blood." Isabel let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his hand on her belly. "I was so scared, Salvatore." "You don't have to be scared anymore," he vowed, his eyes hardening into diamonds. Rocco made a mistake. He thought he was killing a witness. But he just declared war on the mother of my child. He stood up, the exhaustion gone, replaced by a terrifying purpose. "Sleep, Isabel. Tomorrow we don't run." "What do we do?" she asked. Salvatore looked at the fire, his profile sharp and predatory. "Tomorrow we take back what is ours. I'm going to call the only people left in this city I can trust, and then I'm going to burn the commission to the ground." As Isabel laid her head down on the makeshift pillow, watching the man who was now the father of her child stand guard by the window, she realized the truth. The story wasn't about a maid and a boss anymore. It was about a king and a queen, and the war they would wage for their legacy. But neither of them knew that in the shadows of the forest outside, a pair of eyes was watching the cabin. A sniper adjusted his scope. "Target acquired," the whisper came into a radio. "Waiting for the order." The crack of the rifle was deafening, a thunderclap that shattered the intimate silence of the cabin. The kerosene lamp on the table exploded in a shower of glass and oil. The room was instantly plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers of the fireplace and the moonlight slicing through the shattered window. "Get down!" Salvatore roared, tackling Isabel to the floorboards. A second shot punched through the wood of the wall, where Salvatore's head had been a second earlier, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. "They found us!" Isabel gasped, her face pressed against the dusty rug. She was trembling, but her hands were instinctively wrapped around her stomach. "Stay low," Salvatore hissed, crawling towards the overturned table. He reached for his gun, his mind racing. He had been careless. He had let his guard down because of the revelation about the baby. He had allowed himself to feel human for 5 minutes, and now death was knocking at the door. "How many?" Isabel whispered. "One shooter, likely a spotter. Maybe a breach team moving in," Salvatore calculated, listening intently. He heard the crunch of snow outside. Heavy boots, fast approach. They aren't waiting for us to come out. They're coming in to finish the job. Salvatore looked at the heavy oak door. It wouldn't hold for long. He looked at Isabel. She was terrified, but her eyes were open, watching him, waiting for a command. She trusted him. "Isabel, listen to me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Under the rug, near the hearth, there's a trap door. It leads to the root cellar. It exits about 50 yards into the tree line." "I'm not leaving you," she said, clutching his arm. "You aren't leaving me. You are protecting my child," Salvatore said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Go, now. Wait for me by the old well. If I'm not there in 5 minutes, run. Do not look back." He kissed her forehead, a desperate, fierce contact, and pushed her towards the hearth. Isabel scrambled across the floor, dragging the rug aside. She found the iron ring of the trap door and heaved it open. The smell of damp earth wafted up. She looked back at Salvatore one last time. He was positioned behind the overturned sofa, his gun trained on the front door, a demon waiting in the dark. She slipped into the darkness below. Seconds later, the front door exploded inward. A stun grenade rolled into the room. Salvatore shut his eyes and covered his ears, opening his mouth to equalize the pressure. The bang shook the foundations of the cabin. 3 men in white winter camouflage stormed in, assault rifles raised. Salvatore rose from the shadows like a wraith. He didn't just fire. He executed. 2 shots to the chest of the first man. He pivoted, using the chaos to his advantage. The second man fired, the bullets tearing into the sofa, sending stuffing into the air. Salvatore returned fire, catching the man in the throat. The third man, the leader, dove for cover behind the kitchen island. "Clear the room," the leader shouted into his comms. "Target is armed and hostile." Salvatore checked his magazine. 3 rounds left. He couldn't win a protracted firefight. He needed to move. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. He waited. He heard the man shifting, preparing to flank him. Salvatore threw the poker. It clattered loudly against the far wall. The leader turned instinctively towards the noise. Salvatore broke cover, sprinting for the back window. The man spun back and fired, the bullets chewing up the floorboards at Salvatore's heels. One round grazed his thigh, a burning line of fire, but Salvatore crashed through the window, tumbling out into the freezing snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow. He rolled, coming up in a crouch behind a stack of firewood. The forest was silent, save for the wind. But he knew the sniper was still out there, watching, waiting for a clean shot. Salvatore scanned the tree line. There. A glint of moonlight on a scope, about 200 yards out, nestled in a high pine. He had to draw the sniper's fire to give Isabel time to get clear. Salvatore broke from cover, sprinting in a zigzag pattern towards the tree line, away from the well where Isabel was waiting. Crack! The bullet tore through the sleeve of his jacket, missing his arm by millimeters. Crack! The second shot hit a tree trunk right next to his face, spraying him with bark. Salvatore dove behind a massive boulder, his chest heaving. He was pinned. The breach team leader would be coming out the back door any second. He was trapped between a rifle and a hard place. Suddenly, a revving engine roared through the woods. Headlights blinded him. A battered black pickup truck smashed through the underbrush, drifting sideways in the snow. The passenger door flew open. "Get in!" a woman's voice screamed. Salvatore didn't hesitate. He lunged for the truck, diving into the passenger seat just as the snow around him erupted with gunfire. The truck spun, tires screaming for traction on the ice, and sped off deeper into the woods. Salvatore pulled himself up, gun raised, aiming at the driver. "Don't shoot!" Isabel yelled, struggling with the heavy steering wheel. Salvatore lowered the gun, staring at her in shock. "I told you to go to the well!" "I did," she shouted over the roar of the engine. "And then I found the truck in the shed near the cellar exit. I wasn't going to leave you to die." Salvatore looked at her. Her knuckles were white on the wheel, her face set in a grimace of determination. This wasn't the timid maid he had found on the street. This was a woman fighting for her family. A bullet pinged off the tailgate. They were being pursued. "Hold on!" Isabel yelled. She yanked the wheel hard to the right, taking the truck off the trail and down a steep embankment. They crashed through bushes and saplings, the suspension groaning in protest. "Where did you learn to drive like this?" Salvatore gripped the dashboard, bracing himself. "My father was a getaway driver for the Westies before he got locked up," she said, gritting her teeth. "Genetic trait, I guess." They hit the main road at the bottom of the hill, tires screeching as they found asphalt. Isabel gunned it, the speedometer climbing past 90. Salvatore looked in the side mirror. No headlights behind them. They had lost them. He slumped back in the seat, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. He looked at his leg. The graze was bleeding, soaking his trousers, but it wasn't deep. He looked at Isabel. She was shaking now that the danger was momentarily past, tears streaming silently down her face. But she didn't slow down. "You saved my life," Salvatore said. His voice, quiet. "We're even," she whispered. "No," Salvatore shook his head. He reached over, placing his hand over hers on the gear stick. "You disobeyed a direct order." Isabel glanced at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "Good," Salvatore finished. "I don't need a maid, Isabel. I need a partner. And tonight, you proved you're the only person in this world I can trust." Isabel let out a shaky breath. "Where do we go now? We can't go back to the city. They'll be watching the bridges." Salvatore looked out at the passing darkness. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, one he had hidden in the cabin's emergency kit. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 5 years. It rang 4 times. "Yeah?" a gruff voice answered. "Dante," Salvatore said. Silence. On the other end. Then a dark chuckle. "Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal king." To what do I owe the displeasure, brother? I thought you were dead. I was just about to pop a bottle of champagne. I need a sanctuary, Salvatore said, swallowing his pride, and I need a doctor. I'm coming to the scrapyard. If you come here, Sal, I might just finish what the hitmen started, Dante warned. I have a woman with me, Salvatore said, and she's carrying the future of the Moretti name. The line went silent again. Bring her, Dante said, his voice dropping an octave. But if you bring heat to my door, I'll kill you myself. The scrapyard was a fortress of rust and iron located in the industrial wasteland of Gary, Indiana. It was a massive recycling plant that doubled as a fortress for the exiled. Isabel steered the battered truck through a maze of crushed vehicles, parking inside a brightly lit hangar where men wielded wrenches like weapons. Dante Moretti descended from the catwalk. He was a mountain of a man, grease-stained and bearded, the antithesis of Salvatore's tailored perfection. He was the black sheep who had walked away from the family fortune to build his own kingdom of steel. Well, you look like hell, Sal, Dante grunted, crossing his massive arms. I need a sanctuary, Salvatore said, stepping out of the truck and limping heavily. And I need a war room. Dante eyed Isabel, noting the protective way she held her stomach. You brought a civilian? And a pregnant one? She's not a civilian, Salvatore corrected, his voice leaving no room for argument. She's the reason I'm still breathing. Up in the soundproofed office overlooking the yard, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Isabel placed Rocco's smashed smartphone on the desk. I swiped this from him. The screen is broken, but the data is there. Dante handed it to his tech specialist. Minutes later, the truth was projected onto a monitor. Rocco wasn't acting alone, Dante said, his face darkening as he read the decrypted messages. The orders came from a burner phone, pinging from the Upper East Side. Don Falcone's territory. Falcone, Salvatore spat the name. The peacemaker. He framed me to absorb my logistics routes. He wants the Moretti Empire without the war. He's holding an emergency summit tomorrow night at the Lyric Opera House, Dante read from the intercepted data. He's going to announce your death and claim your assets. Salvatore stood up, the pain in his leg forgotten. Then we have a show to catch. He expects a corpse. I'm going to give him a ghost. It's a suicide mission, Dante warned, though a savage grin was spreading across his face. Falcone will have 100 men there. I'm going, Isabel announced, standing beside Salvatore. I am the witness. The old code says a woman cannot be harmed at a summit. If I stand there, they have to listen. Salvatore looked at his brother. I need muscle, Dante. Dante grabbed a crowbar from the corner. I haven't crashed a party in 10 years. Let's suit up. The Lyric Opera House was a cathedral of gold leaf and red velvet, a place where the city's elite pretended to be civilized. Tonight, however, the air was thick with the scent of betrayal. On the center stage, standing before the seated heads of the 5 families, Don Falcone raised a glass of champagne. His voice dripped with faux sorrow. Salvatore Moretti was a brother to us all, Falcone lied, his eyes gleaming with triumph. But greed poisoned his heart. He conspired with the cartel. His death, while tragic, was a necessary cleansing for our society. I humbly accept the burden of managing his territories. I'd save the eulogy, Falcone, a voice thundered from the back of the auditorium. I'm not dead yet. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the hall slammed open. The silence that descended was absolute. Every head turned. Salvatore strode down the center aisle. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor, his face bruised but shaved and sharp. Flanking him was Dante, looking like a grim reaper in a suit that barely contained his muscles. And walking between them, head held high, was Isabel. She wore a flowing emerald gown that concealed her pregnancy but highlighted the fire in her eyes. "A ghost!" Falcone gasped, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the stage. "You tried to bury me," Salvatore said, his voice carrying to the balconies without a microphone. He stopped at the foot of the stage, his gaze locking on to Falcone. But you forgot that seeds grow when you bury them. He is a traitor, Falcone screamed, pointing a trembling finger. Guards, kill him! The guards hesitated. They looked at Dante, who cracked his knuckles, and then at the screen behind the stage. Isabel had stepped forward, holding a remote. She pressed a button. The massive projector screen, meant for subtitles, lit up. It didn't show opera lyrics. It showed the recovered text messages from Rocco's phone, the wire transfers, the direct orders from Falcone to frame Salvatore. He didn't just target a boss, Isabel announced, her voice ringing clear and steady. He ordered the death of an unborn child. He tortured a woman to cover his crimes. He broke the sacred code. A murmur of rage rippled through the commission. The old code was absolute. Families were off limits. The other dons stood up, turning their cold, reptilian gazes on Falcone. Panic seized the old man. He realized his political assassination had failed. He reached into his jacket for his nickel-plated pistol. "Don't!" Salvatore warned, his voice low and lethal. Falcone drew the weapon. But before he could level it, a silver blur flashed through the air. Dante had thrown a heavy combat knife with terrifying precision. It pierced Falcone's hand, pinning it to the wooden podium. Falcone shrieked, the gun clattering uselessly to the floor. Salvatore climbed the stairs slowly, the sound of his footsteps like a ticking clock. He loomed over the whimpering old man. He didn't look at the knife. He looked at the fear in Falcone's eyes. "The city is mine," Salvatore whispered, "and the woman you called trash is the queen who just ended your reign." Salvatore turned to the audience. He held out his hand to Isabel. She ascended the stairs, taking her place beside him. She looked out at the sea of dangerous men, no longer the terrified maid shivering in the rain, but a partner to the most powerful man in Chicago. One by one, the dons bowed their heads. The war was over. The king had returned. And that is how a mafia boss found his salvation, sleeping on a park bench. Salvatore and Isabel's story proves that sometimes the strongest alliances aren't made in boardrooms, but in the storms of life. Isabel went from a homeless maid to the matriarch of the Moretti Empire, proving that loyalty is the only currency that matters. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and romance, please smash that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a part of our next saga. What do you think? Should Dante get his own story next? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.